before starting history and how to read history, these things normally we have always in our mind, and it is such an important subject that you can understand without understanding history, and without history there is no relevance of any country. So we must understand the timeline, and then we will see some important issues till date that is there to study in history. So beginning from there, you can see definition of history as per our understanding. You say history is a study of past. If this is definition of history, then imagine the beginning of history ever since man became human. History started. Very difficult to say when exactly man became human. History started. And then ape had turned into man, and then life evolved on earth, or you can say when earth came into existence. History started from here to 2021. This is the entire timeline which is called history. If history is a study of past by our definition, then endless event, and gradually it is very difficult to ascertain which event we have to study and which event you have to left. So as per our study, almost 4.5 billion year ago history started. 4.5 billion year ago, and almost a 3.6 billion year ago life evolved on earth. Life evolved on earth, and then ape to man, man to human, and then 2021. But we try to simplify the event of the history, those events which have great impact in future social, economical, and political life. Only that event should be considered as a event, as a syllabus of the history. Otherwise, it's very difficult to acknowledge the syllabus. Then at the same time, history is what historian says. And actually it is a study of facts. Plenty of facts we have beginning from the ancient time. And historians take it, analyze it, scientifically analyze it, and then presenting in the episode of history. But analysis of the historians based on certain understanding, and that understanding is totally in the command of the acknowledgement made by historians. So different historians, different interpretation. Facts are same. That is the reason why we take history. History is what historian says, and at the same time it is a scientific and chronological study of the events. So finally what we say, that it is a scientific and chronological study. Scientific and chronological study. History is what historian says, and it is scientific and chronological study. So we have three divisions of Indian history. We have ancient, medieval, and modern. Till 750 AD, we have ancient India. Till 1707 AD, as per NCERT, we have medieval, and then till date we have the modern India or the postmodern, whatever you say. See, if you look into transition of ancient into medieval, a single year or single day could not make ancient India into medieval India or medieval India into modern India. If you want to see visible change as per the dictionary meaning, we have to assess 100, 200 years. And then at that time we can observe certain social changes. That time we can observe certain political and economic changes. And on that very basis we can decide ancient transformed into medieval and medieval transformed into modern. So if you marking a single year as a year of transition between ancient to medieval and then medieval to modern, that means it is only for the convenience of study. There is no logical reason to divide history in ancient, medieval and modern. You have to keep this thing in record, right? So it's only for the convenience of study, only for the convenience of teaching. So in ancient India, if you go into the NCERT course curriculum, some important understanding which we will explain in the coming 10 hours from beginning of the Stone Age to the postmodern period. So in ancient India, we will mark the high points that we need to study in the syllabus portion. In the context of evolution of human, we see there is no debate in anthropology or biology that human evolved from ape. This is unanimous thing in anthropology. So human evolved from ape, and there was a scientist named Darwin. We have studied in school Darwin. He wrote a book in 1856, Origin of Species. And after this book, scientists, biologists, they are unanimous on this point that ape was the ancestor of man. Ancestor of man. And in the evolutionary history, the species that is the species of modern human, it is Homo sapiens. We have a genus Homo and our species sapiens. Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens. So in the study of events, that is called evolutionary history. And ever since man started using tools made up of stone, it is beginning of Stone Age. It is beginning of Stone Age. Ever since. So when stone as a raw material was used to make the tools, it was beginning of Stone Age. Stone Age. So look at, to make the life easier, it was beginning of Stone Age. So we divide Stone Age in three parts: Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Paleo means old, lithic means stone. Lith means stone. So we can say it is old Stone Age. This is middle Stone Age. And this is a new Stone Age. New Stone Age. Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Okay. So if you see the time frame, almost 1.5 lakh BC, Paleolithic age had started, and it was around 10,000 BC. This is a time frame of Paleolithic, old Stone Age. And we further divide Paleolithic. We further divide Paleolithic in three parts: Lower Paleolithic, Middle Paleolithic, and Upper Paleolithic. Lower Paleolithic, Middle Paleolithic, and Upper Paleolithic. So here the man started using tools to make the life easier. But in Middle Paleolithic, there was the very, very important development, and that was discovery of fire. And human, the perspective of lifestyle, social, economical, and political lifestyle, their things had changed very significantly after discovery of fire. Okay. Then in Upper Paleolithic, there is a definite evidence that humans started living in caves. Started living in caves. Okay. And they don't live simply in cave, but they do cave paintings also. Paintings also. So this was the first exhibition of art practiced by early human. Suppose in Madhya Pradesh you go to Bhimbetka, there is so many caves where early human used to stay in Bhimbetka. And they do beautiful painting inside. Beautiful painting means they use natural color to paint. Dry color on dry wall. And this is called mural painting. mural painting. This is called mural painting. Dry color on dry wall, this is called mural painting. Natural color was used mostly. First exhibition of human art, it is also called Paleolithic painting, Paleolithic art, in the form of mural, earliest form of painting. Then in Mesolithic, the tool size became very small, called microlith. You can understand that in this period, the first human missile was used in the form of bow and arrow. Bow and arrow. And agriculture, wild variety of agriculture. They started growing wheat or wild rice. Wild rice you can see in Mesolithic period. So evidence of grain that had appeared in Mesolithic period in India, the first ever evidence that you can see in any part of the world, wild rice. And in Neolithic age, there was Neolithic revolution. Why it was called revolution? Because agricultural based economy. So before that, you can see this period was called hunting and food gathering. This is a period where transhuman migration, there is no need to stay at one place. Where the resources dried, we have to move some other places. So therefore, hunting and food gathering economy that have a very special character called transhuman migration. Transhuman migration. Don't have to stay at one place, that keep on moving one place to another. But whenever there is agriculture, obviously we have to stay at one place. So settled life had started. Village, joint family, all are the part of this agricultural economy. And here, the first metal that was used by human, it was copper. Copper. First metal used by human. It was very much used in the Neolithic period. So, up to 10,000 we have Paleolithic, and 10,000 to 600, 6,000 we have Mesolithic, and then 6,000 to 2,600 we have Neolithic. 6,000 to 2,600 we have Neolithic period. In between, this is the beginning of the evolution of civilization from hunting food gathering economy to settled habitation. We have to study in detail when we will study our larger dimension of covering the syllabus, but this is the format. Then after this we have the first urban civilization, that is Harappan civilization, or you can say it was also known as Indus Valley civilization. Indus Valley civilization. Indus Valley civilization. Okay. You can see in 3000 BC, There was urban revolution in many parts of the world. There are urban revolution in many parts of the world. You can see Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus, Chinese, Greek. No doubt, Mesopotamian civilization was the oldest civilization. Mesopotamia means Iraq. But the Egyptian civilization and the Indus Valley civilization, it was almost parallel in timeline. And then we have a Chinese civilization and then Greek civilization. So the characteristics of urbanization that we see in Indus Valley, it was a very unique. In 1921, a British man, John Marshall, he excavated a city in Pakistani Punjab today. It was Harappa. This was the model of characteristics of the entire civilization. Huge area was there. You can see the entire northwestern area covering from Uttar Pradesh to Balochistan, Pakistan, then to Jammu and Kashmir to Maharashtra. Large area was covered. 1921. Harappa was excavated. And similar town planning, material culture, all we can see. So therefore, gradually the extent of civilization keep on increasing. And there are many fundamental characteristics. The most important was its urban town planning. Elaborate structure that give a very valuable tips for the lifestyle for the Harappan people. How they live, what are the characteristics they follow, their social factor, their economic dimension, their art and craft, their economic activities, trade and commerce, agriculture, domestication of animal, religious belief, all you can see. It was varied, which actually prompt the way that is called the characteristics of urban civilization. 1921. John Marshall. There are many sites located in and around Indus Valley, but Harappa was the place where the first time it came into existence, a full-fledged excavated city. And this is the reason why we name it as a Harappan civilization. Rather than calling Indus Valley civilization, we better have a technical word to say Harappan civilization. Then in the technical achievement, bronze first time came into existence. Copper plus tin, it was mixed in adequate proportion, and then bronze. This is a super specialty of the Harappan civilization. It appeared before it had appeared in any part of the world. So bronze. And they were using so many tools made up of bronze. Made up of bronze. So it was a first urban civilization. most of the things that we study about Harappan civilization, it is the urban character. It is the urban character. If you can see, the entire city, it was divided in two parts. This is the town planning. The city was divided in two parts. This area, which was slightly raised, but it was fortified, where the ruling class people or the elite people used to stay, it was called citadel. Slightly raised from the ground, the entire area. And this is lower town, where common people were staying. There was a market, there was art and craft. So many fundamental things you can see here, including the residential areas that is needed for, as per the definition of the urban cities. So this is what? Rise of the urban character. So only study that we do in the Harappan civilization, it was the study of the urban sites. So regarding the decline of Harappan civilization, which was a very developed urban civilization, decline of Harappan civilization. First thing is the Aryan invasion theory. Aryan invasion theory. Aryan invasion theory. It was said that the Aryans invaded, they were having the fast moving chariot horses and they destroyed the Harappans. This theory was actually presented by British scholars. British historian had presented this theory. British historian had presented this theory, Aryan invasion theory. This is theory where you can see the British all time try to forward the thing which proved the superiority of the West. And therefore Aryan invasion theory was planted. And some misinterpretation of the facts also proved that. But the real theory that really resulted in the decline of Harappan civilization, it was ecological imbalances. Ecological imbalances. Ecological imbalances had disturbed their ecosystem. Decline in rainfall, decline in productivity of soil. You can say decline in rain. So many things that had affected the level of productivity. Sometimes river also dried up. The river valley was a very important source of their life. And river had changed the course. So entire management of their transportation to productivity had changed. So therefore ecological imbalances, this theory was given by F.A.A. Fairjarvis. So Fairjarvis was very correct in assessment regarding the ecological imbalances. Very correct in assessment regarding ecological imbalances. So decline of Harappan civilization, Aryan invasion theory and ecological imbalances. We will study each and every facets of this in detail. That is a part of our advanced curriculum. So after Harappan civilization, we have Vedic civilization. Vedic period, that is constituted by Aryans. It was said initially that the Aryans came from Central Asia. And why did they came? The first question that come across, that from where Aryans came. Look, if Aryans were the pastoral community, then in search of pasture land they keep on coming to this area. So Indian pastorals might be going to this side. So theory always had a one-dimensional explanation. Look at, if you see Aryans, Aryans came from Central Asia. Central Asia. Aryans came from Central Asia. Why did they came? They came in search of pasture land. We have negated the Aryan invasion theory, that they did not came as an invader, but they came in search of pasture land because they were the pastoral community. But they did not came at a time that all the Central Asian tribals decided to come to India. They came in phases, one by one, one by one. And when they come to a new place, obviously there is a conflict with the locals, those who are residing. So therefore conflict and coexistence, and it ultimately resulted in the form of composite culture. So in northwestern India, we have the process called composite culture, evolved with due course of time with the advent of Aryan. This is pasture land. Pasture land. So they came from Central Asia and they came in search of pasture land. And third, what is the meaning of the word Aryans? It is a linguistic group. Linguistic group. Linguistic group. So we should not call Aryans as a race, superior race, or cultural community. Those who having a certain physical characteristics based on the appearances, racial characteristics, but simply Aryans, they are a linguistic community, means those who spoke Indo-European language, like Sanskrit, like Persian, Italian, German. These are called Indo-European language, and they are called Aryans. So those who speak Persian, Farsi, they are Aryans, but Arabians are not Aryans. They used to speak Arabic. Saudi Arabians and others, not Aryans, but Iranians, they are Aryans. So Indo-European language. So we have concluded this. Aryans came from Central Asia, came in search of pasture land, and mainly linguistic group. Linguistic group they are. So Aryans, they constituted Vedic culture. Vedic culture. Vedic culture. (1500 BC to 600 BC), this is called Vedic period. Vedic period. And we have 1000 BC here. So this is called a Rig Vedic period because Rig Veda was composed during this period, and this is called Later Vedic period. because later Vedas was composed. So what is the, see, Vedic literature, Veda, Brahman, Aranyak, Upanishad, these are only four called Vedic literature. Vedas are four: Rig Veda, Sham Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda. So, Rig Veda was composed during this period, but all other Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, Brahman, Aranyak, and Upanishads, it was composed during this period. This is called later Vedic literature. So this is entirely Vedic period. Rig Vedic period, and then we have later Vedic period. So the source of information about the Rig Vedic period is obviously Rig Veda. Rig Veda is a very voluminous book. There are 10 mandalas. Mandalas means volumes. So very voluminous book. So Rig Veda, it helped in knowledge about the period 1500 BC to 1000 BC. 1000 BC. So Rig Veda. Voluminous book. There are 10 mandalas in Rig Veda. So while studying the part of this Vedic period from 1500 BC to 1000 BC, here we will study the social life of the Aryans, economic life, political life, all the dimensions. And here also we will study some changes that we observe, that is social life, economic life, and political life. Around 1000 BC, there was iron. Aryans got to know about the iron. Definitely, iron had played a very significant role in transformation. What life they were living in the Rig Vedic period, this is non-iron using phase. We don't have, Aryans don't understand that they had anything to do with the Aryan. But here in the later Vedic period, they definitely were knowing the Aryan. Here they were living with the tribal life. Sedentary life, they keep on moving from one place to another. Right? That is the way you can see that transhuman migration was very important episode of their life. This is the specialty of the pastoral community. When the pasture land over, then we move to some other places and they keep on moving from one place to another. But when they started doing agriculture, this is the period when Aryans were very much inclined to their agricultural prospects of the economy, and obviously their lifestyle and the concept of a state had changed. Here we have the stateless system. Here we have a stateless system. Right? And here we have the formation of a state. Here the tribals, that was known as Jan, and here we call Janpad, that is territory. Here mostly we have the republican system. Republican system. King was elected, and here we have the beginning of monarchy and subsequently hereditary monarchy. So transition from Jan to Janpad, that is what the political thing that you observe from Rig Vedic period to later Vedic period. So what are the sources? All later Vedic periods, Samved, Yajurved, Atharved, Brahman, Aranyak, Upanishads. This is a source of a study of later Vedic period. Okay. So we will study in detail about the characteristics of Rig Vedic period in terms of their social life, economic life, political life, and subsequently after introduction of iron, what changes we observe? When there was a tribal mode of economy, and then beginning of agricultural practices. This transition we need to study in the detailed perspective. So after Vedic period, we have the post-Vedic period. Post-Vedic period. Post-Vedic period means after 600 BC. After 600 BC. 600 BC. So after 600 BC, Janpad transformed into Mahajanpad. That is a bigger territory. So we can see Mahajanpad. That is bigger territory. So in 600 BC, that is the post-Vedic period, is a very, very significant period in terms of formation of big empires. What we have referred, it is a Mahajanpad. Rig Vedic, Janpad, later Vedic, Janpad, and then post-Vedic Mahajanpad, big empires. And out of the 16 Mahajanpads were there, as per the sources of the Buddhist study, Buddhist literature, Magad was very, very powerful Mahajanpad, and Magad had overshadowed other Mahajanpad that led to the Magadhan Empire. Okay. Then second important development we can observe here. Second important development we can observe, that is called second urbanization. Second urbanization. Second urbanization, let us see the characteristics. Second urbanization. First urbanization, it is referred in the Indus Valley, and second urbanization, it is a reference of the Gangetic Valley. So it is urbanization of Gangetic Valley. It is urbanization of Gangetic Valley. And third thing, that is a rise of Buddhism and Jainism. Buddhism and Jainism. It is called heterodox sect. Rise of Buddhism and Jainism, it is called heterodox sect. Big empire, second urbanization, and rise of Buddhism and Jainism. It is marked by a new social change in the perspective of dominance of the Brahmanical system was challenged. Ritualistic things which was very much rooted in Indian society as per the Brahminical system, was also challenged. Rigidity of Burn system. So many things you can see. This is mark social change, rise of Buddhism and Jainism. So here Gautam Buddha from his birth to Nirvana, 563 BC he born, and at the age of 29 he left his house. He was deeply concerned about the human suffering. Why human born again and again to suffer? And that prompted Buddha to think in other ways. So at the age of 29, he left his house, which was very much described, Mahabhi-Niskarman. Great renunciation, great departure, means departure to achieve something exceptional. What was the central essence that Buddhism were trying to access? Gautam Buddha, root cause of human suffering and why human born again and again to suffer. So after leaving the house, which is this terminology explained the ceremony in the Buddhism called house leaving ceremony, Mahaviniskaraman. It is a very auspiciously considered. And then 6 years of penance. And Buddha got enlightenment while he was sitting near a peepal tree. There is a place in Bihar. Earlier it was called Uruvela. Now it is famous as Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya. Right? So now at the age of 35 he got the enlightenment. Then he gave the first religious discourse. There is a place called Sarnath. Sarnath is in UP, where Buddha gave the first religious discourse. It is called Dharma Chakra Parivartan. You can see very boldly written in NCERT, Dharma Chakra Parivartan means turning off wheel of law. The way that you live your life, after listening that sermon will change. Dharma Chakra Parivartan. And finally, Buddha died. This is called Mahaparinirvan. 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 That is death. So, the birth of Gautam Buddha to his house leaving ceremony and then to getting the enlightenment called Nirvana. Near peepal tree, and then first religious discourse at Sarnath, Dharmachakra Parivartan, and his death, Mahaparinirvan. Many things. You know, Gautam Buddha was very much responsible for making Buddhism known to the public. And the way that many problems were there in the society in the form of the evils, Buddhist discourse had removed it. And that is the reason why his concept became very popular among the people. He had a great organizational skill. He established Sangha. And the monks, those who used to live in that Sangha, the members of the Sangha, they were responsible for the spirit of Buddhism. They were very different from the common life led by the Upasak, that is the followers. So followers are known as Upasak, and the monks, they are called Bhikshu, and they used to live in a very different life. all monks, they were living in Bihar. Bihar. Residential place of the monks. Residential place of monks. Residential place of the monks. This is called Bihar. So Gautam Buddha. Then finally, subsequently, many of the rulers, they supported Buddhism. But in 1st century AD, there was an Indo-Greek ruler named Kushan, Kushana dynasty. A ruler of that dynasty, Kanishk. He convened the 4th Buddhist Council. We'll study 4th Buddhist Council. And Buddhism got divided in two parts. That is called Hinayan and Mahayana. Hinayan and Mahayana. And then Mahayanists, they started worshipping statue of Buddha. You must be knowing what is that. Buddha was the first human to be worshipped. Because the way that he changed the world order, Buddha was first human worshipped. During the doctrine that has popularized, that is Mahayanist doctrine. So the post-Vedic period, we have three different and important thing to discuss. One is the Mahajanpad period, that is Magad Mahajanpad. Then we have second urbanization, and third is the Buddhism and Jainism. Mahajanpad, according to Buddhist literature, there were 16 Mahajanpads at that time. In 600 BC, there were 16 Mahajanpad, all were there during the lifetime of Gautam Buddha. And then Magad Mahajanpad, it had overshadowed other Mahajanpads and resulted in Magadhan Empire. In Magadhan Empire, we have one dynasty called Haranyak dynasty. There are some important rulers, Bimbisar, Ajashatru, then we will see some of the facts. Then second dynasty that ruled Magad, it was a Nag dynasty. And third dynasty, it was Nanda dynasty. So Haranyak, Nag and Nanda. These three ruling dynasties were there, ruled Magad. But by the time of the Nanda dynasty, Greek also became very ambitious to invade over India. And it was during the time of Nanda dynasty, there was a ruler named Dhananand. Alexander invaded. So, invasion of Alexander. Invasion of Alexander. Around 326 BC, Alexander, he was from Syria. the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, and then invaded over India. He reached as far as Indus. Did not enter deep inside India, as military wanted to go back. It was a long expedition of the entire Central Asian conquest. So, invasion of Alexander. But because of that invasion, there was a chaos in the northwestern part of India. And in northwestern part, there was a university called Takshila, the oldest university known in the world, where Chanakya and the Chandragupta both were there. Chanakya as a professor of political science, and then Chandragupta. So, Takshila. And taking advantage of that chaos, and then after retreat of Alexander, Chandragupta, with the help of Chanakya, captured this area first. And taking advantage of unpopularity of Nandas, Chandragupta captured Patliputra and thereby created a huge Mauryan empire. Huge Mauryan empire. So, Magadhan Empire, it had transformed into Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire. Magadhan Empire, it had transformed into Mauryan Empire. We will study the achievement of Chandragupta Maurya. No doubt, Chandragupta Maurya was responsible for geopolitical unity on the basis of swords. Then Bindusar, his son, his achievement, and the greatest among all was Ashoka. Ashoka, greatest among all. Ashoka was first monarch in Indian history who spoke to the people directly by the means of inscription. First monarch in Indian history who spoke to the people directly by the means of inscription. Ashoka issued many inscriptions. We'll have to go in detail. That is a rock inscription, there was a pillar, and there was cave. So, Ashoka, cave. And Ashoka was known for his very, very emphatic philosophical expression that is necessary for the survivability of Mauryan Empire. It was his policy of Dhamma. The concept of secularism, fundamental right, fundamental duties, responsibility of the state, all come across in his explanation of Dhamma. This is how the relation between rulers and the ruled was defined on the basis of what is the relation between father and son, the paternalistic monarchy defined by Ashoka. And that was very much reflected in the policy of Dhamma. There are very excellent artistic creation you can see in the Mauryan pillar, particularly Sarnath pillar. Sarnath pillar, the Sarnath is a place where Buddha gave first religious sermon, his first discourse. And in Sarnath pillar, it is highly articulative. The best of the Mauryan art you can see by the simple expression of Sarnath pillar. It is hallmark of the Mauryan art. You can see that there are inverted lotus and then marked spirit, this abacus. This is called abacus. and then 4 crowning lines sitting back to back. And all these pillars part was connected to shaft. Shaft. And on abacus we have the bull, then 24 spoke wheel, then horse, then 24 spoke wheel, then elephant, then separated by 24 spoke wheel. BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited. This is the order that you can see on abacus. And then Satyamev Jayate. This word was later on pasted here, photoshopped by Government of India. It became emblem of Government of India. This word Satyamev Jayate, it is an Upanishadic thought. It has taken from Mundak Upanishad. Mundak Upanishad. BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited. This is series that the animals were arranged. Many times in the examination you can see, and then finally Satyamev Jayate was placed there, and to make it a emblem of Government of India. So Sarnath pillar was hallmark of Mauryan art. We can see many artistic expressions in Sarnath pillar. Subsequently, the foreign relations of the Mauryans, the socio-economic activities, the administrative profile, all we have to see in a very factual format. Because in examination, in prelims, we can have question from this segment, and Mauryan Empire is a very highlighted and represents the India's glamorous past in establishment of All India Empire. So it's always very important. So after decline of Mauryan Empire, we can see the polity of North India and Southern India, it had got almost divided in terms of the creation of empire. This was the extent of Mauryan Empire. See. This was the length and breadth of the Mauryan Empire. And this is called Sangam State. This is called Sangam State. Sangam State we have Chera, then Pandya, then Chola, and then Satyaputra and Keralputra. So Chera, which is also called Keralputra, then Chola, Pandya, and Satyaputra. These states are called Sangam state. And Sangam state, it was contemporary of the Mauryans, and they had a very friendly relations there. Contemporary of the Mauryans, and they had a very friendly relations there. Most of the ports of the Sangam state was frequently used by Mauryans. So the separate state means no identity changed of the Mauryan Empire. But after decline of Mauryan Empire, we can see there was a very big division in the political structures of India. The northern Indian polity and the southern Indian polity almost got divided. Almost got divided. and southern Indian polity almost got divided. In northern India, we can see after decline of Mauryan Empire, Shunga dynasty. Established by Pushyamitra Shunga. Pushyamitra Shunga. Shunga dynasty. There are few more rulers. There are some achievement of the Shunga. Then we have the Kanva dynasty. Almost there is no significant contribution as far as Kanva dynasty is concerned. And then we have Indo-Greek. In the northern Indian political structure, we have Indo-Greek, advent of the Greeks, Indo-Greek. Indo-Greek, for the first Indo-Greek ruler who established empire in India, it was in the background of the weak centralized political system of northern India. The first Indo-Greek who established empire, he was Menander. And after that, we have three dynasties: Shaka, Parthian, and Kushan. Three dynasties that ruled in the name of Indo-Greek: Shaka, Parthian, and Kushan. Shaka ruler Rudradaman, he was very famous and the greatest among all Shaka, Rudradaman first. And the Kushana ruler Kanishk, a very significant contribution in India's social, economical, and political dimension, Kanishk. Particularly Kushana period. It is called mercantile period. Mercantile period. Kushana period, it is called mercantile period. The flourishing nature of trade and commerce, particularly with the Greek Empire. So Greek had a very good connectivity with India in terms of trade and commerce. So Kushana had a very good connectivity with the Greek Empire, and because the empire got integrated, first time you can see the Central Asian Empire got integrated with the Indian Empire, and the credit for that goes to Kanishk, Kushan. Right? So it is a mercantile period. It is a mercantile period. And particularly after discovery of monsoon, the trading activities really became very, very intense. 45 AD, monsoon was discovered by Hippolus. Monsoon was discovered by Hippolus. And after that, the trade mechanism with India and Central Asia became very easy because of this is trade wind. So Kushan, mercantile period. We know the fourth Buddhist council was also organized, that resulted in the split that's called Hinayana and Mahayana. Hinayana and Mahayana split. Hinayana and Mahayana. And at the same time, sculpture got very much prominence during the time of Kushan. We have the two schools of art here. One is called Gandhara art and second is called Mathura art. Mathura art. This is a Hellenistic art by the use of sandstone, and the towering statue of Buddha was constructed in both the arts, Gandhara art and Mathura art. The first statue of Buddha was definitely constructed in Gandhara art, claimed otherwise also, but Gandhara art. So, new dimension of art and craft with the rise of Kushan. So, after Kushana dynasty in ancient India, we have Gupta. Gupta Empire. Gupta Empire. Founder of Gupta Empire was Sri Gupta, with the capital Patliputra. 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 Guptas were feudals of Kushan, and they had taken a very high exalted title. Based on divine origin of kingship. But the greatest ruler of the Gupta dynasty, the real founder, we have Chandragupta first. Chandragupta first. He was called the real founder of Gupta Empire. Married with Lichavi princess, that greatly enhanced the prestige of Gupta. Then Samudragupta. He is called Napoleon of India. V.S. Smith, a British historian, he called Samudragupta as Napoleon of India. Napoleon born almost 1500 years later than Samudragupta, but still we'll call Napoleon of India. Rather, Napoleon should be called Samudragupta of France. That is what the dominant character of the Western historians in writing about the history of India. And then we have Chandragupta II. He is also known as Vikramaditya. Vikramaditya. Chandragupta II, he is also known as Vikramaditya. Huge empire he created. But the significant thing is that because of his contribution to patronage of many great literary genius, we have Kalidas, Kalidas. We have Bishak Dutt, Shudrak. They were great literary genius living in the court of Chandragupta II. Even the Chinese traveler Fahian, he visited India during the time of Chandragupta II. Fahian, he came via land route and returned to China via sea route. Long traveling, living in Patliputra. So crossing the South China Sea in the Strait of Malacca and then finally going to China. So via land route and then came to return to China via sea route. There was a very famous port in Bengal, Tamarlipti. It's a very important port since the Mauryan time. And Mauryans also used that port in dealing with the trade with Sri Lanka or the Southeast Asia or the southern India, but at the same time Gupta had a very fantastic policy called Lookist policy. After decline of Roman Empire, the Gupta mostly favored the trade with the Southeast Asian states. So Lookist policy was very significantly drawn by Chandragupta II, Vikramaditya. So Gupta period, mainly you see Gupta period was called golden period. Golden period. Golden period in the sense the contribution and development of literature, art and architecture, we have development of science and technology, particularly in the field of astronomy and mathematics. Then religious synthesis. This is a time when many religious cult like Buddhism, Jainism, Hinyan, Mahayan, Digambar, Shwetambar, then Saivism, Vaishnavism, many religious cult, many tribal religions, they got all integrated by the synthesis of the Gupta's policy of religious synthesis, and then perhaps the entire religious character of the Hinduism, it had evolved during the time of Gupta.